Hello, dear friends. This is part two of my looking into the biblical portion of the week, which we are, as always at this time of year, reading from the book of Genesis. And as I said, when there is an unusual event, of historical proportions, like the war that is taking place now between Israel and Hamas, the Bible starts to bring it up out of the text and starts pointing to it. As I said, according to our traditions that we have, this is a famous tradition from the Vilna Gaon from 200 years ago. The Bible in general, the five books of Moses, the Pentateuch, the Torah, tells all the history of the world from the beginning to the end. But not everybody is able to see it. It's in times like this, when there is a movement within geopolitical history, that the message in the Bible comes out more, becomes more apparent. A lot of people start noticing it, and there's some very uncanny things because the Torah starts talking to us, sometimes also to give us hints what we must do in order for the outcome to be a better outcome. So I started this last time about a week ago, and I would like to continue it now. Now, I have to backtrack just one parsha. Last Saturday, we read Lech Lecha, the story of Abraham going to the land of Canaan. And I mentioned this idea of land of the Canaan means that this battle is about the land of Canaan. It's about the land of Israel. It's a battle between us and the Hamas, and even the children of Ishmael, for who will control the land of Israel, which I will explain a little bit further in this short talk. Another thing I mentioned last time, in last week's Parsha, Abraham hears that his nephew Lot was taken into captivity. And because his nephew Lot, who had moved to Sodom, was taken into captivity, Abraham decides to battle the four kings who fought against the five kings. Now, there's a lot to say about this. So you have four kings who come from the north. Or let me backtrack again for those who don't remember the biblical story. In the biblical story in chapter 13, in the book of Genesis, if you remember, Lot, the nephew of Abraham, leaves Abraham. He finds it difficult to live together with him. And so he goes to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, as they're called. And he lives in Sodom. While he's living in Sodom, there is an attack of the four kings who come from the north over the five cities of Sodom. Five cities of Sodom are Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Tzvoyim, and Zoar. But only two of them are actually mentioned as Sodom and Amorah. So Abraham, in order to save Lot from captivity, he battles the four kings and wins them. Now, the parallel to what's happening today, I think, is quite obvious, because we had, after the terrible murders and massacre that happened both in the Rave Festival and also the Gaza envelope, what we call the kibbutzim and the settlements around Gaza, what's called the Gaza envelope, the Jewish settlements, people in masses were taken into captivity. And here you have Abraham, whose nephew Lot was taken into captivity, and he fights now against the four kings. Who are the four kings, by the way? As I said last time, they come from the north. They came from Shinar, which is the biblical name of Babylonia, one of the biblical names, Shinar. They came from Tidal, the same type of place. And so basically, they came from the area of Mesopotamia, of Iraq and Iran from today, which is exactly what's happening today. Iran is standing behind it, and it has its proxies who are fighting against us. Why are they called the four kings? They're called the four kings because they actually came from four towns in the north. Today, who are the four kings who are fighting against us? It's very obvious. It's Hamas on the one hand, including Hamas's brethren in Judea and Samaria who are also creating problems, and also they have some other people too. It's the Hezbollah, number two. It's the Houthi, number three. And of course, Iran, who's standing behind everybody. These are our four kings from the north, if you want to call it, because they originate, the money and the backing comes from the north. We're fighting against the children of Abraham today, in this sense, which is us, but I'll talk about that more. And then we have another story. And I'm now going to turn to this week's parasha. In this week's parasha, in this week's portion, it's called Vayera, and it starts from Genesis chapter 18. And God appears to Abraham after, by the way, after he had circumcised himself, according to the rabbinic tradition. On the third day, he comes to visit him to pay his, to say hello to somebody who is in pain. And Abraham sees three angels. And who are the three angels? They come to, the first angel tells them that Sarah is going to have a child, and his name is going to be Yitzchak, the one who will laugh last. Yitzchak is in the future. He will laugh last. Isaac. We'll get back to Isaac and why he's in this particular chapter. And then the second angel is there to tell Abraham that he will be totally healed from the circumcision. According to our tradition, it is Michael who tells Sarah she will have a child, and it is the angel Raphael, which is like my name, the angel of healing, who tells Abraham that he is going to be healed. And it is the angel, the third angel, who is Gabriel, is the one who goes off to Sodom because God is going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, Abraham is told by God that he's going to do this, that these cities are evil. And by the way, we know from the Parsha of Noach that evil is called Hamas. And I talked about that last time. So these cities are evil. And Abraham says, wait, okay, the cities are evil, but there are a lot of innocent people there. You know, how can you start a war against the ones who are guilty when there are so many ones who are innocent? How can you do collective punishment? Exactly what we're hearing from a lot of the people of the IDF. So Abraham says, I'm not against the idea of getting the wicked people, but we have to figure out what to do. God says, you know what? If there are 50 people there, I'm not going into the, God can do collective punishment. But human beings, as human beings, when we punish, we have to try as hard as possible, only to hit the guilty. And I have to reiterate what the Israeli government has been saying, including the heads of the army. This was a war against the Hamas. It's not a war against civilians. Unfortunately, there are a lot of civilians that have been supportive and taking even part, because on the massacres of October 7th, you even had civilians from Gaza taking part in doing these crimes, perpetrators of these crimes. But even so, the army has to rid itself of the military wing and the political wing of Hamas in order to start again. But that's not my talk now. This is something I can talk about another time. But it's interesting, Abraham was told that these 5 cities have to be destroyed. By the way, there are 5 cities. I don't know if you know, but in Gaza, there are actually 5 provinces ever since Oslo Accords. The city was made into 5 provinces. These 5 provinces are called North Gaza Governorate, Gaza Governorate, Deir al-Balach Governorate, Khan Yunis Governorate, and the Rafah Governorate. So there are exactly 5 small cities within Gaza, or 5 areas within Gaza, just like Sodom and Gomorrah had 5 parts to it. Sodom, Gomorrah, Sodom, Amorah, Admah, Tzfoyim, and Soar, which are all mentioned in last week's Parsha, because these were the 5 cities that were attacked from the north by the 4 kings. In other words, the kings who come from the north, from Iran, they actually take over the 5 cities, and the 5 cities are the cities of Sodom and Amorah. Just like today, Iran basically took over Gaza through its proxy of Hamas. And God says we have to destroy these cities. We know from Moses, by the way, that you can, human beings are allowed to kill just the guilty. We don't have to do collective punishment, and we don't believe in collective punishment in general as Jews. How do we know that? When God said to Moses, this is in the Midrash Tanit Veliyahu, when God said to Moses, after sitting the golden calf, let me destroy this people and make you into a new people. So according to the Tanit Veliyahu, Moses says, I have a better idea. let's kill all those who participated in the sin of the golden calf. And he asked the tribe of Levi to kill all those who participated, who were only 3,000 people. Very often, it's a small amount of people who get everybody else on the bandwagon. And God accepted this. In the same way, if we knock off the Hamas, if we knock off those who are stirring up, who are creating the terror, then you have changed the situation, and then the other people can live their lives in normal way. I go back to the Parsha now. There's something very, very significant, aside from these parallels, which I was basically showing as parallels. And aside from these parallels, these two parshiot, despite, as I said, the shocking parallels of Lot taken into captivity, Abraham fighting against four northern nations, or we'll start from the north, who came to the south, and then Lot, his nephew, taken in captivity, and that being the reason for him going out to battle, like our captives, and our hostages, meaning our people who were taken hostage. And then, of course, in this week's Parsha, God's saying that these are evil cities, these 5 cities, and they really should be destroyed. And the decision of the Israeli government to go after the leadership, political and military. But now the most amazing part of these last 2 portions is that both last week and this week are the 2 portions in the book of Genesis in which there is a discussion, or actually the story of Hagar. Hagar, the mother of Ishmael. And again, Ishmael is the father of the Arab nations, even according to the Arab tradition, not just according to the Jewish tradition and the tradition of the Quran as well. And this starts from chapter 16. I'd like to go over this because both in last week's portion and in this week's portion, you have a story between Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. And these are very important stories to understand the relationship between Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar, and Isaac and Ishmael, the founder of the Arab nation. Because it's going to tell us some of the difficulties involved, but it's also going to tell us some of the solutions that can be involved. And remember, before you have a political solution, you have to have an ideological and philosophical solution, and if you want, sociological solution, because you have to have a direction. And the Torah gives us direction. After God tells Abraham, in the covenant of the parts, I will give you the land of Canaan, where you came, the Canaanite lands and the Canaanite nations, in chapter 15. Then all of a sudden, in chapter 16, we have an unusual story. Sarah, Abraham's wife, has not conceived for 10 years. She has no child. But God keeps promising Abraham, your children are going to be. So Sarah takes a step and she said to Abraham, you know what? God is not allowing me to have a child. Take Hagar, my maiden, my servant, and have a child from her. Maybe you will build up the nation of Israel through her, because obviously God is not giving it to me. And then, now I want to mention that in ancient laws of Mesopotamia, by the way, like Hammurabi, etc., if a man has a wife, but that wife has no child, but he has a child with one of his female servants, that child can claim continuation. But if the matriarch does have a child, that child cannot claim anything. Now, Abraham is came from Mesopotamia. He's familiar with these things. And Sarah, who came from there, is familiar with these ideas. And she says, look, I want to be fair. You deserve a child. If God is holding me back, let's see. Could also be she wanted to know if she was to blame her or him, but let's say she wanted to see. And so Abraham takes Hagar as Sarah asked. Hagar was Egyptian, by the way. That's what it says here. In fact, the the Midrash says, or rabbinic interpretation says that she was actually from a royal family in Egypt, and she really wanted to be part of Abraham's family. And she has a child. And because Hagar has a child, and probably because she's familiar with ancient laws, she starts belittling Sarah, meaning she has the child. Her child is not going to continue. So you're a nothing, right? Until now, I was the maiden. You were the matriarch. But hey, I have the child now. And Sarah doesn't like this. She was trying to do something good for Abraham. She was actually doing something good for Hagar too. And now Hagar is abusing it. So Sarah says to Abraham, I'm angry with you. By the way, she uses the term Hamas, Hamasi. I'm angry with you. I gave you my maiden, and she doesn't say, but I wanted you to have a son. And now that she's pregnant, she's making fun of me. May God make judgment here. That's not fair. I don't deserve to be. It's enough that I was willing to step back, so you should have a child, but I should not be belittled by this woman because she's pregnant. And Abraham just says, Sarah, okay, you decide what to do. It's up to you. And Sarah gives her a hard time. Inui, she afflicts her. And Hagar runs out, this pregnant woman, Hagar, runs out to the desert. And in the desert, she comes across an angel of God, Al Ein Hamayim. Now, there's a lot of play of words here, and if you don't know the Hebrew, you might not notice it. But the idea of vision comes back here many, many times. Eyes and vision, because it says that when it says that she despised Sarah, it says she belittled her in her eyes. Okay, is used here. And also when she goes down to the spring, a spring in Hebrew is called Ayin, which also means the eyes. And it says it twice that she went to the spring in the desert on the way to the desert of Shur, and Shur means the sea in Hebrew. It's one of the words. And then the angel appears to Hagar and says, Hagar, where are you going? Hagar says, what do you mean, where am I going? I'm running away from my matriarch, Sarah. Now, this is a double entendre. I am running away because she afflicted me, but I'm also running away from her being the matriarch. I want to be the matriarch. I'm pregnant. I'm going to have that child. She didn't have the child. It is my right. I want to be the matriarch. I don't want to be second fiddle anymore. So she brings her argument. Remember what Abraham said to Sarah? Sarah said, may God make judgment. God is making judgment right now through the angel. Remember, Sarah was a prophet. The angel says, the angel of God, it says now. Malach Hashem, before it says, both times, the angel of God. The angel of God says, you know what? Go back to your matriarch. Meaning, let Sarah continue as number one. V'hit ani tachat yadeha, and let yourself be afflicted under her if necessary. You need her. Let her be number one. You be number two. She has the vision. She has the sight. She has the direction. Just learn from her. Everything will be fine. And then the angel of God again says to her, don't worry. Your child will become a great nation. There'll be lots of them. And then again, it says, the angel of God says, don't worry. As you know, you are pregnant. You will have a child. His name will be Yishmael, which means he hear. God will hear. Because God has listened to your affliction. But I'm telling you, go back. She's your matriarch. Let her be number one. She knows exactly what she's doing. You be number two. Everything will be fine. And that child will be peradam. He's going to be wild. His hand will be everywhere. And the hand of everybody will be in his. And that's it. The angel disappears. And then Hagar calls that place where God spoke to her, God, you are my vision. So Hagar is told, go back because you need vision. So Hagar says, God, you are my vision. And then she calls that place Be'er Lachai Roi, etc., which will come back again next week. What is Hagar being told? Hagar is being told by the angel, Hagar, you cannot be the matriarch. That's not the way it's set up. Sarah is a very unique individual. That is her job. You are now getting a child. That child is going to be a very large nation. And God listens. And if we'll find out next parsha, God listens to the child. It's a nation of prayers who know how to pray. But the vision they have to get from Sarah. The vision of Hagar's family has to come from the Israelites, from the people of Israel, or else they're going to be without the vision. We're going to be blind. Now I'm going ahead to this week's perikopa, to this week's portion, this week's portion. Because again, we have a fallout between Sarah and Hagar a second time. The first fallout was that Hagar wanted to be the matriarch instead of Sarah. Right? Now, what's the second fallout? This again, we have right after the story of the 5 cities which are supposed to be destroyed, in Sodom and Gomorrah. In the end, it was 4 out of 5. And right before the parsha of the Akedah in chapter 19, we have the story again of Hagar. Okay, I am now reading from Genesis, Bereshit, chapter 21, verse 8. And the child grew up. But by the way, right before this story, and this is very important, also in chapter 21, God tells Abraham, you're going to have another son. His name is going to be Isaac. Sarah laughs. And she calls the son Yitzchak, which means he will laugh. Because then Sarah realizes she is the matriarch. And there's no reason. But Hagar still is going to have problems. But what happens in the second thing? Maybe Hagar stopped saying things. But Sarah sees that this child of Hagar, the Egyptian, is playing, and the term used here is mitzachek. Mitzachek is laughing or laughing at Isaac. Laughing at Isaac. Now there's, in the Talmud, there's an opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. It says, what did he do? Rashi says what he did was he was doing sexual things, whatever, laughing at. Shimon Bar Yochai says what he was doing was taking his arrow because he was a hunter and pretending to aim it at Isaac. Oh, I just missed you. Oh. What is the inner meaning here? The struggle between Ishmael and Isaac is who's going to continue the house of Abraham, which means who will be the continuation of God's promise of a great nation, of the heads of the nations, and who is going to continue God's promise of the land of Canaan, the land of Israel. So Ishmael says, I was the firstborn. Should be mine. You weren't around when I was born. And my mother thought that too. But God said to Abraham, Ki b'yitzchaki kareh lechazera, says in this week's parsha, through Isaac shall your seed continue. So Sarah says, okay, we can't have this in the house. Get rid of Ishmael. He cannot inherit together with my son Isaac. Get rid of this maiden and her son. They cannot inherit with Isaac. Abraham didn't like this. What do you mean? It's my son. And then God said to Abraham, don't worry about the boy and about his mother. Whatever Sarah says, you do it. Because through Isaac, your seed will continue. But don't worry, this boy from your maiden, he will be a large nation because he comes from you too. So Abraham gets up in the morning and he gives water to Hagar. And he sends them towards Beersheba, where Abraham used to be. But as she's in the desert, she runs out of water and she doesn't know what to do. And she throws the boy under the bushes. And she says, I don't want to watch the boy die. And she cries. But then it says, and God heard the boy, not Hagar. And the angel of God said to Hagar, what are you doing? God heard the boy. Take the boy, hold on to him. He's going to be a great nation. And God opened her eyes, and she saw a spring of water, and she filled up her canteen. And the boy remained there in the desert and was a hunter with a bow and arrow. And his mother took him a wife from Egypt. I want to explain to you, and this will be my last idea that's going on, because this is a very deep relationship which is going on between Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar on the one hand, and then it's going to be Isaac and Ishmael. When Abraham is giving water to Hagar, he gives a limited amount of water. Why? Abraham knows. Abraham is called in Kabbalistic literature kindness. And kindness is symbolized through water. Abraham says, if this is a legitimate son, Ishmael, they will find water even in the desert because they will find kindness. Ishmael does. Unfortunately, Hagar does not, but Ishmael, the son, does. He prays to God, and there is a spring, which means, yes, he has actually the grain of kindness from Abraham, but he still lacks the vision. He can hear, he lacks the vision. Sarah's nervous about this. She sends him away. Let Isaac grow up, maybe later. But this is not the end of the story. Until now, we see that Ishmael, which represents the Arab nations, and Isaac don't seem to get along, or at least Ishmael and Abraham and Sarah don't. We don't know if he didn't get along with Isaac. It's Sarah who is nervous about Ishmael. And she sends him away. High fences make good neighbors, right? So we'll just send him away. Why have an influence? But Isaac has a different idea. And in the next parsha, which is called Chayei Sarah, the parsha of the life of Sarah, where Sarah passes away, we find something interesting. Because at the end of this week's parsha, which is called the famous story of the binding of Isaac, it says at the beginning, Abraham says to his lads, I and the boy, meaning Isaac, will go up to the mountain, we will bow down to God, and we shall come back. But at the end of chapter 22, the binding of Isaac, it says only Abraham came back to his lads. Where was Isaac? After the Akedah story, after the binding of Isaac, Isaac disappears. We find him, the portion after that, in Parshat Chayei Sarah, the next week's Parsha. Where was he? He had gone to the desert, to the Negev desert, to Be'er Lachai Ro'i, to that wellspring called the wellspring of the living one who sees me, meaning God, which is where Ishmael lived, according to this week's portion. In other words, Isaac, after the binding of Isaac, he goes to visit, to live with Ishmael, the only other person in the world who knows what it means to be a child of Abraham. And they live together for a few years until Rebekah is brought by Abraham's servant to be wed to Isaac. Where does she meet Isaac? In Be'er Lachai Ro'i, in that well area where Ishmael is living. That's where she meets him. And then he marries her and moves. But he spent years with Ishmael. The Talmud says, what happened with this years that Isaac spent with Ishmael? Isaac was there to educate Ishmael of what to do. Isaac was there to be Ishmael's eyes, give him direction. And according to the Talmud, it succeeded. Because the Talmud says that when Abraham died, it says in Genesis that he was buried by Isaac and Ishmael, his sons, even though Ishmael was the first to be born. Talmud says that Ishmael said to Isaac, I understand that you are the chosen, but we work together. So I want your name to be first in the verse, which means that Ishmael started binding with Isaac. And in the biblical story of Ishmael, we don't find any problems with Isaac at all. They come along. What does this mean for us today? What can we take out of it when we look at this terrible war that's going on now? Well, when Israel came back to the land of Israel, and we are Israel and we live in the land of Israel, so we are indigenous to this place. Just ask the book of the Torah, the Bible. The Arabs have this concept in Arab lands, nobody else is supposed to have Arab lands. But the Arabs know in their Quran the children of Israel came from Israel. In fact, the Quran says that the children of Israel will go back to the land of Israel. The Arabs have a bit of a problem with that. The same problem that Hagar had. It's our area. We're chosen. Remember the Quran, it talks about not the binding of Isaac, but the binding of Ishmael. We were the chosen by God. Okay, there's a people of Israel, it says in the Quran they're supposed to come back. But that was the original people of Israel who were believers. Look at these Jews, a lot of them are not believers. We call them Jews. We don't call them Israelites anymore. The more the Arabs of Ishmael will understand that we are connected to our traditions, and we are truly the Israelites who are originally descended from Abraham, the more it'll be easier to them to come around to the idea that Ishmael and Isaac have to work together. It won't be easy. All the extremists, who by the way are not great believers, they're just politicians looking for power, all the extremists will look for all the divisive aspects in the Quran, and there are a lot of divisive aspects in the Quran, but there are also things about the Torah. There's also things about the Israelites and the Jews, which are very, very positive in the Quran. Remember, Muhammad was basically received all his ideas from Jews. He was, of course, offended when the Jews didn't follow the Islam, but originally he was very taken by them. So you'll find both in the Quran. So what can we do as a people? First of all, the Abraham Accords is the perfect thing to do. If you look around the Arab world today, if you look around the Middle East today, our enemies mostly are not Arab. Iran, who are Persian, are not Arab. They're Muslims, but they're not Arab. We're having problems with Turkey, who are Muslims and not Arabs. There are some Arabs involved. Qatar is a little bit involved, unfortunately. And what we call the Palestinians, Arabs from these areas, from Syria and from Egypt. But if we are able to move forward, if we as descendants of Isaac can look Ishmael in the face and say we have to move together under what we call the Abrahamic Accords and get Saudi Arabia involved, we can finally bring peace because of the fact that we have a lot in common. And if Isaac will talk to Ishmael in his language, which is the language of tradition and the language of belief, they will understand that we have a lot in common and that we can be their eyes, just as that they can be together with us ears. And hopefully one day peace will come. But unfortunately, in the meantime, justice has to be done. The Hamas has to be removed. And then finally, we can try to work out what will happen the day after, together with those living in these areas. Because obviously, if we are together, then God wants us to be together, and we have to learn and work towards some type of modus vivendi of living together, together with our cousins from the Abrahamic Accords. Shalom, shalom.